Hi, I'm Doug Woodward, here with another Prophecy in the News program. Today, I'm pleased to welcome to the studio writer, researcher, nominee for Pulitzer Prize, Troy Anderson. Troy, welcome to the show.
It's great to be on the show, Doug.
Great. Well, we're going to talk about you and your co-author, Paul McGuire, have written a couple of books. We're going to talk about one of them in particular. I'm holding up a draft copy, but this is the actual final copy, hardback, really beautiful book. We're going to talk about kind of a small section of the book. There's so much information in this. It doesn't take long. 15 pages, you can do a 30-minute program. It's that kind of jam-packed thing. Tell the folks a little bit, the name of the book, Trumpocalypse. That's a hard thing to say sometimes. Tell the folks a little bit about what is the book expressing? What is it about Trump and the apocalypse why are they kind of going together in this sort of meme, if you will?
Trumpocalypse, the end times president, the battle against the globalist elite, the countdown to Armageddon is a combination of an investigative expose of the powerful forces that want to topple the Trump presidency, combined with an exploration of how does he fit into the unfolding, end time events we see, occurring in the world today.
Right, right. I think in this program, what we're going to try to do is talk a bit about the threat to America from the standpoint of really strategic weapons and kind of how Donald Trump has been placed in the midst of this. The left is worried that Donald Trump will be sort of the mad bomber, that he may push the button. The right doesn't see it that way. Evangelicals wonder if the arrival of Donald Trump signals some kind of reprieve from the judgment that America seems to have been heading towards for some time. Speak for a second, if you will, just about kind of this sort of issue that's going on with evangelicals, kind of the variety of ways they're looking at Donald Trump, if you will, in terms of those of us that study Bible prophecy, that are interested in that, and kind of, okay, how do we fit Donald Trump into the scenario, if you will?
Us, like, many people were very surprised that, Donald Trump won the presidency.
Right.
And the question afterward was, what happened here? I mean, it seemed like the odds were against him, and all of a sudden he became president. Franklin Graham came out and called it the God factor.
Yeah,
There's some kind of, perhaps some kind of divine intervention.
Providential.
Right.
Right.
So then the question becomes, why would God intervene in this election? Why would President Trump become president at this, one of the most prophetic times in history?
Yeah, yeah. That is as we used to say, I'm showing my age, the $64,000 question. Why now? What is happening right now? What I'd like to get into is covered in your chapter, the super EMP threat and the daughter of Babylon. All right, which really is a kind of a veiled reference to the possibility that America is in some way perhaps the daughter of Babylon. But let's talk about an EMP. First off, what is an EMP?
An EMP is electromagnetic pulse. And what we've learned is that North Korea, working with Russia, has developed what were called super EMP weapons. I interviewed a former CIA analyst, Peter Vincent Pry, and he and the former director of the CIA, James Woolsey, had written articles in The Hill, The Washington Post, and The Washington Times, expressing great concern about these weapons that North Korea, may have. They believe that there could be a couple of these aboard satellites that orbit over North America, and these potentially have the power to knock out our electric grid, which could have devastating, impact on our country, plunge us back to like a 19th century kind of situation.
How did we learn about the power of the EMP in the first place? How did we discover that the EMP thing was a conceivable weapon, if you will?
I'm not sure about the history of
the atomic bomb, actually.
Right.
Yeah, when they were. I'll just go ahead and jump in here because I know some of these things. The atomic bomb, when it went off, in some testing that was being done actually in the 1960s, I think, it caused a knockout of the electrical grid in Hawaii for a part of the time. And that time, of course, Hawaii and the U.S. wasn't as dependent on its electrical grid as it is today. But that was actually one of and we sort of said, what's that? And we learned that an atomic blast actually has has sort of a side effect, an unforeseen consequence that we didn't know about, this electromagnetic pulse, and it would knock out any kind of electrical system. So what's happened, and this is what you talk about in the book, is that this EMP has sort of been weaponized as a special type of weapon, and apparently North Korea has put this, like a small atomic bomb or whatever, perhaps in satellites. Is that correct?
Right, and one of the things that came out recently is that they think that if they did put these weapons aboard satellites that orbit over North America, perhaps these don't have telecommunication abilities, with their trigger device.
Right, right.
So now the concern is, could North Korea be, trying to launch another one? And so, the military is now looking at, what could be done to help prevent, a launch of one of these, actual weapons.
Right.
So even though we're not sure if they have ones that actually work orbiting over us, they are concerned about, potential other launches of these weapons.
Good point, and as I understand it, most satellites, as we think of a world map, we sort of think of the continents, from left to right or whatever, and we think of the rocket ships, doing this sort of parabolic, satellites and Apollo, spacecraft and whatnot, would sort of travel more or less across the equator, from east to west. What's different about the North Korean satellites is they're orbiting over the poles, South Pole, North Pole, South Pole. And so it means that every few hours for a few hours, one of these satellites is actually over North America. And that's if the satellite was armed with a nuclear device and it was timed to go off, in effect, when it was over the U.S., it could have a devastating effect.
Yeah, I mean, in their study, they estimated that, if one of these went, they detonated one or two of them, and it did truly knock out our electric grid, it could lead to, cell phones wouldn't work, airplanes wouldn't work, cars, computers. I mean, pretty much all electronics could be knocked out. And without, electricity, you don't have running water. You could have, gas lines exploding from problems there.
Right.
The fires, you could have all kinds of problems. And they estimated that, 9 in 10 Americans, could die within like a year of something like this happening.
Because all of the water systems, the energy systems are all dependent upon electricity, food distribution, farming. It's like, if this happened to us in 1940, it wouldn't have such a devastating effect. But happening to us in 2018, everything is electrical. And so we have like no backup, no analog backup systems. Everything's digital. And so it really increases the threat. So talk a second, if you would, about this concept of asymmetric warfare. What is an asymmetric warfare concept?
Well, for many decades, the common theory was that we have our nuclear arsenals, Russia has theirs, other countries have theirs, and so mutually assured destruction. If they attack us, we blow them up, and so it kept the world in relative peace for many decades. But now we have this situation where you have sort of a rogue state like North Korea, and there's questions, what role has Russia or other countries played in their
apparently quite a bit. Yeah. So, but yeah, go ahead then.
And so now we have this very, this new situation in geopolitics and military affairs where you have these, like a potential tripwire kind of country.
Right.
And so it's this uncertain situation, and we've watched this unfold for the last year with, President Trump and Kim Jong-un have this war of rhetorical war of words.
Korea threat.
Right.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier Peter Vincent Pry, Dr. Pry, and James Woolsey, who was a formerly CIA director. And back in, I think it was 2007, there was a congressional committee that did a study on EMP. I think our friend Chuck Missler's even talked about this and the threat of EMP being used against the United States. So this was something that was studied. It was something that was put before Congress, and I think there's a couple stats in terms of what it would take to, in effect, harden the grid, so that if a PMP happened, it wouldn't have such a devastating effect on that. What were those stats, the cost and the timeline? Do you recall?
Yeah. So the EMP Commission did submit a report. It was given to the Department of Homeland Security, and they, were considering, doing some kind of pilot program to essentially harden the grid.
Yes.
And the estimate that is, this would cost about $2 billion,
Mm-hmm.
but it would provide quite a bit of protection from a potential EMP blast, enough protection that the country could probably recover,
Right.
somewhat
Relatively
relatively
quickly.
quickly.
Right.
And it's only like $2 billion, but as
Yeah.
far last I heard, it hasn't gone anywhere. It seems like sort of a no-brainer
Yeah.
to take care of this.
It's like we run up probably $2 billion in additional national debt, in about 16 hours of a day.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So it's not like that number should be too scary to us, right? But yet Congress hasn't really taken any action that we know of. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, last time I talked to Peter Brinson-Pry, he told me that they hadn't taken any action, and they'd actually disbanded the EMP Commission. So
Right.
it doesn't make sense.
Against the warnings of a number of Americans. I think a journalist, Ted Nightline. What was Ted's last name? I'm trying to look at it.
Koppel?
Yeah, Ted Koppel. He actually wrote a book on the EMP not that long ago. Kind of like he discovered fire, maybe. But it was like he was wanting to popularize the awareness that the EMP is a real threat to America, and so probably not as good a book as some of the others that have been written on this subject, but nevertheless concerning. So, yeah, I think a lot of this has to do with these transformers, these enormous things that utility companies use, and if you want to create, it's like they don't make that many of them. They're hard to manufacture. Transporting them, you have to widen bridges and have these giant flatbed trucks, and so it's like if it happens and we haven't hardened the infrastructure, it could take a long time to get us back online. And that's why you said earlier that it's predicted that there would be such chaos, a shortage of food, water, power, that it could be devastating. We could lose 90% of the population in the United States in just 1 year. That's one of the sort of doomsday scenarios. So yeah, the EMP thing is a threat. The other thing, I guess, that's a threat is the fact that some of our enemies have actually hardened their infrastructure. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah. I mean, Russia, China, other countries have taken steps to, protect themselves from potential EMP weapons. Apparently, we don't have them, at least that we know of.
Right.
And so we don't have sort of that, they can threaten us with it, but we can't threaten
But we
them.
don't have the same
Right,
threat to go
right.
back the other way. Yeah. So it's interesting, as you point out in the book, that I'll just quote this. This is a couple of sentences from your book. In 2009, South Korean military intelligence reportedly concluded independently of the EMP Commission that we just mentioned that Russian scientists were in North Korea helping them to develop super EMP weapons. And in 2012, a People's Republic of China military commentator stated that North Korea has super EMP weapons. And so it appears, the intelligence tells us that these exist. That could be the weapon of choice, an asymmetric attack. All this discussion about delivering a hydrogen bomb shot from North Korea to America. It's kind of like, look what I have in this hand when I've got this EMP weapon in my other hand that I don't want you to see, right? And this is the one that's actually going to get you. And so that could be the strategy, isn't it?
And some of the things that have come out recently is that Kim Jong-un has hinted, that he may want to use these kind of weapons. I mean, he's definitely talked
Yes.
about nuclear weapons, but he's also made statements that intelligence experts believe are threats about an EMP weapon. So, as far as they know, he's definitely interested in these weapons.
Yeah, this is not something that he's not unaware about. I mean,
Right.
This is something that he is very much aware about. Well, let me stop for a second and tell our viewers a bit more about the book, Trumpocalypse. The subtitle is The End Times President, A Battle Against the Globalist Elite, and The Countdown to Armageddon. So the book places in context, amongst many other issues, but this one issue in particular, the danger to America right now, which we'll continue to talk about in a moment or two. But it places that in the context of today, what Donald Trump is finding himself in the midst of, the challenges that he faces from the media, mainstream media, the left, the far left, the Republican establishment, and so forth. So it talks about that. Obviously, a lot of emphasis on the evangelical reaction to Trump and how do we interpret what Trump means in terms of where America is right now. So we'd like to offer you this book for $24.95, and it's a beautiful cover, hardback, so it's really a nicely bound book, as well as written by a great writer over here that's been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, no less. And so we also have the prequel to this book, The Babylon Code, which I had the fun to read about a year and a half ago, I guess it was. And this book we're offering for $23.95. And then together, we'd like to offer these in a package to you for a special price of $44.95. So we want to make you aware of this offer. Take a look, if you would, at your screen. You should see information about the web store, on the website, if you will, and as well as a phone number that you can call to order these books if you'd like to have them. So I've read them cover to cover at least once, and so I highly recommend them. So anyway, so having said that, let's come back and talk about some of these other issues in terms of the threat to the United States, why it's particularly acute at this moment in time. There's several things, and these are actually things from Pry's book, which he wrote called The Long Sunday, which he was warning that we had a particular threat in 2017 between the time of the election in November until the inauguration, that there's this period when you're transitioning the administrations, and that was a particular threat. Happily, we got through that. But he still pointed out, I'm just going to read these and then maybe have you react to these a little bit. The U.S. Army has the lowest number of active duty soldiers since World War II. The U.S. Navy has the smallest number of ships since 1915. The U.S. Air Force has the smallest Air Force in its history. And then there's America's strategic nuclear weapons are aging and obsolete compared to the new generation of nuclear weapons developed by Russia and China. And then this last point, which is kind of startling, the United States ceded to China and Russia a virtual monopoly in tactical nuclear weapons, retaining only 180 gravity bombs, which are basically non-intelligent bombs that just drop them out of the bomb bay and they hit the ground, versus an intelligent bomb that's actually guided by a laser. So we have only 180 of these gravity bombs, smaller, in effect, impact, if you will, in terms of the number of kilotons or megatons, while Russia has 3,000 to 8,000 tactical nuclear weapons for battlefield use. And if I'm not mistaken, that may just be in the European theater as well. So Russia has, in effect, quite an arsenal, and Putin's been updating those weapons, hasn't he? And so what was your reaction when you sort of discovered these things, and then talking to Dr. Pry about this real transition away from you might say, the dominance of America's military compared to Russia and China?
I mean, this is stunning. You know, I mean,
Right.
most Americans have thought that America is the strongest military power in the world, and we must have, this incredible Navy and Air Force and all these nuclear weapons, and
Right,
we could take
right.
on anybody.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we've been, downsizing our military for decades. We haven't made new nuclear bombs in decades.
In decades,
Right,
literally.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
We pull one out of storage and fire it off from out in California,
Yeah.
right, once a year. So, still works.
It still works.
Still works. That's good.
in fact, during the campaign, President
Yeah.
Trump came out and said, we don't even know if these things work anymore.
It's not quite that bad, but it's almost that bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not quite that bad.
But it's almost
but,
that bad. Yeah.
So this is a very serious situation.
It is.
And in the meantime, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they've all been spending tons of money to have the latest weaponry, latest nuclear arsenals, best missiles,
Right.
all kinds of scary stuff that's been developed
Right.
in the last couple of decades. So yeah, this is a very serious situation.
No, it is, and just looking at the threat from Russia, which obviously today Trump is sort of fighting this Russian collusion allegation, that the Russians, that Putin wanted Trump to win the election more than Hillary, and that Russia, the left is arguing, which is kind of a reversal, that the Russians are really an enemy and they're interfering in our elections, and they interfered. They were the ones that actually stole the memos from the Democratic National Committee's computer, which, by the way, Bill Binney, who was the expert in security formerly with the NSA, designed all their security systems. He says that is hogwash. So based upon all the data, there's no way it could have been a hack. There's no way it could have been stolen by Russia from across the seas. It had to be an inside job, someone with a thumb drive that got a copy of that. And of course, we all know that there's the rumor that Seth Rich was perhaps, who was murdered, in the summer of 2016, was perhaps the person that handed the thumb drive to Julian Assange through an intermediary, right? So we know that that is really a difficult thing. Nevertheless, Russia has kind of come back in sort of the crosshairs as this potential threat, and there is reason to worry as we've talked. I found it interesting. You talked about this sort of interesting guy named Alexander Dugin. You know, that Foreign Affairs magazine called him Putin's brain, and Breitbart News called him Putin's Rasputin. And he has like 20 million viewers. A pretty influential guy in Russian television. Talk for a second about the nature of this guy and kind of why he plays into this sort of Russian threat. What is it that he sort of says or talks about that's a little bit frightening?
I mean, the reason why we brought him up in the book is because President Putin has expressed some interest in his writings and such, and he came out with a book that I forget the exact title, but it was like at some point America must be destroyed.
Oh yeah, since I have a copy of your book here, said Dugin once opined that the American empire should be destroyed, and at one point it will be.
Yeah, that's a pretty
Right.
shocking statement.
It is a shocking statement.
And he's and Putin has
He's kind of the Alex Jones
Right,
of Russia,
right.
more or less, isn't he?
And so it makes you wonder what is what are the Russians really thinking? Is there are they still Russians, Chinese, do they still want to be the dominant superpower in the world?
Yeah, exactly. That kind of leads into this this discussion of, was the fall of Russia, the Soviet Union, was it genuine, or was it somehow a masquerade? You all reference a person. I have a good friend that also has actually interviewed this gentleman. His name is Anatoly Golitsyn. He wrote a book. He's written several books, but one of his books in 1984, interesting year, was New Lies for Old. And talk for a second about this whole issue of bringing up. And of course, he was a person. Not a trying to think of the right term. Someone that basically has decided he wants to come to the United States, right? So he was brought in through the intelligence services and so forth. And so anyway, talk a second, if you would, about Golitsyn's theory about what it is that really happened in the Soviet Union in 1989 to 1991, that time frame.
Yeah, so after the the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism, there was a number of people like him, other defectors that came to the West, and they made this claim, back in the 1980s and 1990s that the whole collapse of communism was a ruse, and that simply designed that we would disarm ourselves, and once we got to a point where we were weakened enough militarily, this might be an opportunity for them to make their move. I mean,
Right.
it's a shocking claim, but
Yes.
this is what these guys wrote in these
Yeah,
in
yeah.
these
He wrote an
books.
earlier book, I think, called The Perestroika Deception, and that's what the claim was that the collapse of the Soviet Union was really a strategy. It was a way to cause us to fall asleep. Now, whether that's true or whether that's just part of the gamesmanship, obviously the Russians are good at playing chess,
Right.
and so but it's alarming that it could be part of their strategy. Where this sort of leads, and we got about 3 or 4 minutes left in the program, is this sort of leads to this issue of what is the real threat to America, and what is it that the Bible says could happen to America. You all talk a bit about the daughter of Babylon. You mentioned me, by the way, Chuck Missler, David Wilkerson. Talk for a second about how some of the folks that have written about this from an evangelical point of view have suggested what might happen to the United States in the end times.
So in this book, I interviewed 50 different about 50 different people, faith leaders, Bible scholars like yourself, experts in geopolitics, military affairs, intelligence, and one of the theories among Bible scholars or Bible prophecy experts, including yourself, you wrote the final Babylon, and
Right.
and
Is Russia destined to nuke the United
yeah,
States?
that
Right.
book certainly caught my attention.
Right.
And as you and Chuck Missler and David Wilkerson had talked about, could the reference to daughter of Babylon in the Bible in the Old Testament be a reference to modern day America, and could it be connected to Mystery Babylon and Babylon the Great in
Right.
Revelation 17 to 18, which
Right.
if you read those chapters, it sounds like it's destroyed in a nuclear attack. So this is a concern.
Yeah, there's just to quote some scripture here. This was quoting from my book, but it's it says I cited 220 biblical verses about an entity, a city, nation, state, or empire known as the daughter of Babylon that will be destroyed like quote Sodom and Gomorrah, Isaiah 13:19, and then Jeremiah 50:12, Jeremiah 50:23, 50:37, 51:7, and 51:13. The prophet describes the daughter of Babylon as the hindermost of nations, which is the sort of the world's youngest or the last superpower, the hammer of the whole earth, the world's most powerful military, the world's wealthiest country that is composed of a mingled people. Think Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your poor, your muddled masses yearning to be free. Surrounded by many waters. U.S. has more fresh water than any other nation. Obviously located on sort of two oceans and one Gulf of Mexico. That great city, Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And of course, there's a great debate amongst Bible scholars about whether this is referring to America. Could the verses in the Old Testament that are in Isaiah, predominantly in Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51, there's a reference in Zechariah, there's a reference in the Psalms, could it reference America? What's been the reaction, I'm curious, from others that you've talked with about this? Are they still convinced that the revived Roman Empire is where Mystery Babylon is? Has there been any kind of a real reaction that you can comment on?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an overwhelming reaction to this book. It's become a #1 bestseller on like 8 categories on Amazon. We've gotten literally hundreds, if not thousands, of comments, and then there's all kinds of different,
Yes.
opinions. Some people think that the revived Roman Empire will be in Europe eventually, and some people wonder, could America be part of,
Right.
or maybe the headquarters of this revived Babylon, the return of Babylon,
Right.
and so. It's a gigantic question in Bible prophecy.
It's obviously big. You talk a lot about it in the Babylon Code. Talk about it some more in the Trumpocalypse. But we're wrapping up the program now. Clearly, it's the issue of how threatened is America. Just looking at geopolitical events, it's obviously threatened. And then if you place it in context of some of the scriptures, it makes you wonder. And Donald Trump is in the midst of all this right now. So, evangelicals, it's time for you to awaken. Join in the action, if you will. Pray about it. Be a part of the movement right now to focus on the Scripture. Pray for this country, and let's pray for the president. Until we talk again the next time, keep looking up.